But my philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity. Divided is our nation, combating and fighting hatred. The mission, should you choose to accept it, is fighting racist. Psychology is just a space where we run in our simulations. We load you up with the tools, then we plug you into the matrix. So have a seat on the couch, now tell me your situation. Take a look in the mirror, be honest, just who you facing. Marginalized as a youth, what challenges were you faced with? Feeling you wasn't equal, told that you wouldn't make it. Your ID isn't real, got you constantly trying to fake it. Hiding behind masks in the closet till you can't take it. Getting harder to breathe, someone choking you on the pavement. Unspeakable violence attacking you cause you Asian. Accomplices, we accomplish through collaboration. Engaging, educating, evaluating one another. Liberating the future of all our sisters and brothers. Empowering, elevating all communities of color. Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity.
The Strength and Solidarity podcast is a conversational piece that invites scholars, community activists, leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs to discuss their work as accomplices in cultivating cross-racial ethnic solidarity. Hosted and produced by Pooja Mamidana and Dr. Donna Demanari, our podcast team also includes our podcast interns, Alexis Rios and Petra Zadroga. The Strength and Solidarity podcast strives to engage, educate, evaluate, and empower communities of color, one episode at a time.
Our guest for today features Dr. Maysa Akbar. Dr. Akbar is a respected scientist-practitioner and APA's Chief Diversity Officer, CDO, and Chief of Psychology in the Public Interest. She is charged with infusing equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI, into the fabric of the association's work. As the leading architect of APA's evolving EDI framework, Dr. Akbar works with APA staff, leaders, and members to refine and build consensus for an overall plan, operationalize its goals, and establish metrics to monitor and ensure progress. The CDO also serves as a spokesperson and advocate for EDI in the field of psychology, both within and outside the association. Before assuming the CDO post, she was the founder and chief executive officer of a clinical practice based in New Haven, Connecticut, which specialized in race-based trauma. She created a consulting firm and an educational network focused on organizational cultural transformation. Her firm delivered cutting-edge programs anchored in EDI to city governments, public schools, and court systems, among other entities. Dr. Akbar's areas of specialty include racial identity development, racism, urban trauma, and allyship, topics on which she has authored research articles, books, and book chapters. Dr. Akbar is an experienced instructor and a master trainer in EDI for both the medical and the broader community. Hi, Dr. Maysa Akbar. Thank you so much for being here on our podcast today with Dr. Donna and I, Strength and Solidarity. We are so excited to have you here today.
Hello.
Hi, I'm excited to be here.
I know. Thank you for, I know you're incredibly busy as CDO of APA, so we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure. I always welcome these kinds of discussions, and I think it's important for us to have them on a continual basis.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. And so we'd like to begin if you could tell us your journey in your chosen career path.
Ooh, that journey. It's interesting. I think that in psychology in general, when we are integrating ourselves into the field, in the beginning, you struggle with sort of identifying what part of your lived experience comes into play when you're talking about being a professional, in this space. And what I've learned, not just throughout my career, but especially being in this role, is that oftentimes you lead by your lived experience and the knowledge that you gain academically and while you're in practice, and the variety of different things that you may do with your job just sharpen your skill set. But foundationally, your lived experience is what got you here. So with that, I'll answer that question. I am the only child of immigrant parents who came to this country with the pursuit of many immigrant parents, a better life for our family, the hope for prosperity and for financial stability, the hope to be able to, support our family back in the Caribbean. I'm originally from the Dominican Republic. And I'm very proud to be an island girl, and to bring my culture into my work. And so very early on, I had a very incredible view for the world globally, because my worldview wasn't just based on how I was socialized here in the US, right? I had had an appreciation and an understanding for culture, for cultural differences, for linguistic differences, and the spice or the salsa that we can bring into like the different conversations. And then I was like fascinated with like humans. I was just fascinated. I thought, like, what makes people tick? Why do people make the decisions that they make? Why do people hurt each other? And how do we engage in community with one another? And then I had a really significant life experience that happened to me in the beginning of my teenage years, where my parents decided to move back to our home island and not take me with them. And so, and there are many immigrant stories that sound just like mine. Right. At that time, being 13 years old, I didn't realize that was part of the immigrant story. I really felt that it was a suffering that I was encountering, and that really harmed me as a young woman, a young teenage girl. And then I just became very clear that because of the sequence of things that happened, the traumatic events that happened in my life, I would be able to learn from those experiences and be able to help other children that perhaps were going to experience or had experienced the same types of, harmful events that I had experienced. And so here came psychology as an opportunity for me to leverage, all of that, all of what I had encountered, but then use the educational background to sharpen it and to really be able to streamline it. And so that's how the path for my career really began at a very young age. And it's been such an incredible and exciting journey since then. So yeah, I mean, I could talk more about than where my early career started, if you'd like to know that as well.
Yeah, of course.
Sure.
We'd love to know that. But thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And, the way you described it is exactly how we want our guests to share their origin story and what got them to doing what they're doing. And thank you so much.
It really shapes the lens of how you see the world.
Right.
And the funny thing is that early on, when I didn't understand how that piece of my life would fit into my adult self and, kind of harness the type of person that I would be, I felt like I carried the world on my shoulders. But it was through the shaping of that, like you said, the origin experience, the idea that I can take this and understand it and not only find healing pathways for myself, but perhaps have an offering or a gift to others where I can provide some of the same things. And so I can be a catalyst for change because I know what it feels like firsthand. talking about it in theory. I'm talking about it in experience, you know?
Yeah. And something that, we've kind of spoken a lot with some of our guests on this podcast. And, I was born and raised in India, but I studied in international school. So I've always been around different folks of life from like a very young age. And that social cultural upbringing, not even the upbringing, it's like their cultural like understanding, your cultural attunement can really start at a very young age if you wanted to. And when you kind of shared what that journey was like for you, it really resonated with me.
Thank you.
Yeah. And from one island girl to another, really appreciate, you sharing that journey and for providing a voice to the community, even though, yes, we have varied journeys and varied backgrounds, but there is that shared, experience that many immigrants go through.
Yeah. And then that we can connect to that,
Yes.
and that we don't have to let our authentic selves go in lieu of becoming a psychologist, right? But that instead there's a beautiful integration of who we are, how we show up for people, what our life has, created in terms of the way that we view the world. And at the same time, use our discipline, our profession, our science to bring it all together, right?
Yes.
And then we are the biggest translators for being experts in human behavior. So why not marry those two things together?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so we can switch gears and like obviously we want to hear more about, like your early career and then kind of obviously we know you've done so much in leadership, so we're also curious to understand like how you went on that path.
Okay. So I did my, of course, undergraduate work. I went to the University of Albany and completed an undergraduate degree in psychology and women's studies. And then I wasn't quite sure what track of psychology, as you both may know, because you may have also, as women of color, experienced this, is like psychology could be very nebulous as an undergrad. You're like, wait, what do psychology? What's the path and who and what are the different options? And like, I think for me as an undergrad, it was like, oh, either you go into the academy or you become a therapist. That's it.
Yeah.
There's no other option. These are the only two things offered. And I wasn't really sure what that meant for me in terms of like fit and alignment with what I wanted to do. But I knew that I had sort of interest in both. And I love the idea, like, that we can be both scientists and practitioners at the same time, again, embodying the fullness of who we need to be. But and so I knew at some point that I wanted to go into clinical. However, I had a community mindset when I was thinking about my professional life. And so in between my undergraduate and my PhD work, I went to Florida A&M University, which is an HBCU, historically Black college and university, in Tallahassee, Florida. And I did my master's in community psychology, which at the time, when I was there in the late 90s, it was really the mecca of Black psychology, right? Every prolific Black psychologist was either at FAM or close to FAM. And so it was such an incredible way to sort of level set my career and to give me to open my eyes to a different way of knowing and being within the discipline. And I'm so appreciative because that really shaped who I was going to become. I didn't know it then, but who I was going to become as a professional, and then uniquely positioned me to be able to do the job that I do today because of that background. And then I went to St. Louis University and finished my PhD there. Again, one of like maybe two people of color during that time. So really complicated and difficult environment to navigate. And so I have so much compassion for students because I know what it feels like. I know what they're going through when you are the one that's offering insight into sort of what is happening. You're like the DEI ambassador or the EDI ambassador in your college programs, right? And it's like, aren't you my supervisor though, right? Like, aren't you
whether you want to or not.
Yes. And it's a huge responsibility.
Yes.
In addition to the power dynamics and the fact that you have a goal there, right? To go and complete your study and leave. And in fact, I tell this story every so often, but while I was finishing my graduate work there, I had a professor who pulled me aside one day and said to me that I didn't have the pedigree to be a psychologist and I should reconsider whether I continue in the program and whether I would even want to be in mental health, period.
Wow.
Well, thank goodness I didn't listen to that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that we would be, I would be in a very different position in life. So, it's not that it's clean, right? You enter into psychology with all these aspirations and dreams and visions of what it could be. And then along the way, there are significant obstacles that, that really could set you back. And you have to otherwise really focus on the goal. So that was my educational background. I want to stop there and see if there's anything that you wanted to pick apart. Right?
It actually got me really emotional hearing that, because I am a student. I'm a doctoral candidate, and obviously can really resonate. You're talking about way back then when you did your school, and I keep telling Dr. Helen Sue is my mentor, and I keep having conversations with her, and I feel like all of you have really set the path for us, right? In changing that for us in the field, and we still have such a long way to go, but thank you for speaking to that student experience, because many of the times, yes, there's those power dynamics, and you have to protect your clients, and they don't know what, your supervisors, just because they have that license or they have so much experience, they don't have experience really understanding the community and the clients that are from minoritized backgrounds or who have refugee status or who are asylum seekers and, all of that. So yeah, I just was thinking about all of that, and it moved me in many, many ways. Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to say to you and all the other students who may be listening to this is don't give up. I remember when I heard that, and you internalize what people say about you and how they see you in an incredible kind of way where it can make you rethink whether you are ready or whether you should be in the profession. And I remember I was already dealing with imposter syndrome. So you want to talk about multiplying that to the 10th degree, saying that to me, really did me in. But I remember holding back my tears, one, because I was I refuse
to cry.
For you to see me cry in front of you. Yeah. Went into one of the clinical rooms, bawled my eyes out, called my best friend and was like, I'm leaving this program. I cannot do this. And, she put me back together and was like, you go back in there and you tell him that he will not break you. And, I cleaned up tears and I cleaned up my face. And then I went back into that office and he was like, you're back again. And I said, you know what? You will not break me. I will graduate from this program. And one day I will be an amazing psychologist. And then I left and then cried some more.
That is amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah. So Pooja, I hope I'm saying your name right.
You are.
Yeah. I feel you and I feel your energy and, we're with you, all of us, that have been paving the way. And you will make it too. And one day I'm sure, I tell people I'm not going to do this forever. So the next generation has got to come on.
Oh yeah. And then I also mentioned in the very beginning that you are currently our Chief Diversity Officer in APA. Woo!
Yes.
And a very important position. And I'm assuming a fairly new position, correct?
Yep.
And I know, we know the history of APA and the racist history and how it's been built on the backs of, communities of color as well. I'm just really curious too, how you navigate being entrenched in this organization, as we are, as Pooja and I are as well, but not compromising your own values and your own worldview and your lived experience as a woman of color.
Yeah, I mean, it's very complicated to sort of, navigate. And what I will say is my background in, before I came to APA, I published a book called Urban Trauma. And and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about the books later. And also a book called Beyond Ally. So like kind of two sides to the coin, right? Looking at, what does intergenerational trauma look like? My body of work before coming here was around racial trauma, but also what does allyship look like? And I think that in a lot of ways, having come in with that level of experience allowed me to navigate both, sitting in solidarity with my siblings, in trying to move a very complicated and complex agenda. And at the same time, trying to rally in those that want to ally, to move psychology forward in a way that is based in equity and diversity and inclusion. So the combination of those things, I think, allow me to navigate the complexity of the role. It's not easy. I think that oftentimes it's hard to please everyone. But what I do try to do very much is always offer a listening ear, even if we don't agree. I can see your humanity and you can see mine. And what I also try very much to do in my job is to build consensus. I'm a lifelong learner, so I don't take this job and its title as if I know everything. In fact, before I came into this job, as you mentioned, there's decades of body of work that had been done in psychology by, prolific scholars whose shoulders I stand on, right? That opened the pathway for me to be able to do this job. And I don't take that lightly, and I do not take it for granted. And because of that, people say, how have you been able to do so much within such a little, amount of time? You mentioned it, under 3 years. And when the groundwork is already laid for you, when the path has already been paved, and it's just, getting from the current position to execution, yeah, it's a lot easier to be able to do it. And that's what I say to those that came and have been relentless in their advocacy and in their activism around challenging psychology to be different. So, that's how I counterbalance. And then I got my tribe that I lean on, and I'm like, woo, today was a hard day. Let's not forget the tribe.
Yeah. And that's really important, right? It's as part of our own self-care.
Yeah.
To pinpoint who your accomplices or allies are.
Yes, absolutely. And to be very deliberate and intentional around who those folks are, and that has been a saving grace for me. And also, you need the feedback. And I am very fortunate that my tribe and those connected to them do not mince words with me, right? They're very direct. And so I'm able to metabolize that in a loving way, but hear them out. You mentioned the complexity of the job. And one of the things that, I always call out is, although, in October 2021, APA issued a historic apology to communities of color under Jennifer Kelly's, presidential leadership. Issuing an apology doesn't mean that people have to accept it, right?
Right.
And what we saw, through the weeks and months that followed was that the Association of Black Psychologists said, I appreciate your apology, but I do not accept it, right?
Right.
And it was important for us to lean into that and to understand their reasoning for it, and that you don't force forgiveness, right? You hold space for it. And, at the same time, this year when Tama and I were at the ABSI convention, we're there, we're talking about the apology, AB side saying what they got to say about, APA. And then at the end, we're all like, in the foyer laughing and cracking jokes because, a lot of these folks were trained me through my career. And there was a student that came up to us and said, how can you all laugh together after all of this stuff? And, they were so perplexed and confused. And I said, oh, we're still friends. I was like, we're friends. We represent different organizations. So organizations may not agree, but it doesn't mean that we don't stop being colleagues and friends. And so that's really important to center that, right? That
Yes.
we can have a difference of opinion. You don't have to accept something that I'm giving you. And at the same time, it does not have to compromise how we feel about each other as people, right?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And it speaks volumes to like your leadership too, because especially in the work that you do, like obviously listening is really important and getting that feedback is also really important. And, we also hold positions in different psychology associations. And oftentimes what we see the struggle in leadership is not being able to have that perspective. So thank you for also sharing that. And what are some of these what are some of your duties and responsibilities in your role that you could share with us?
Absolutely. So, now I have a dual role. I oversee both the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Office that sits within, if you're kind of thinking organizationally, it sits within the executive office. So I directly report to Arthur Evans, which is our CEO, and he designed it that way. He really didn't want there to be any barriers to the accomplishment of EDI. And, one of the very first things that he said to me when we talked about the role is that his desire is to have EDI embedded into the DNA of the organization. And I took that very seriously as part of my position. And a lot of times CDOs like me who work in the industry who don't see success in the work that they are doing is because they are not directly reporting to the CEO. It's because there are multiple layers in between them and activating the areas that they want to be able to change. And it's because they don't have the support. And I've just been very fortunate that has not been my situation. And that most often when I can go directly to him during my one-on-ones, not only is he supportive, but he's opening the path for my work. And the board has also been equally supportive. And then my second role now that I've taken on is the Chief of Psychology in the Public Interest, which is a really unique and incredibly dynamic and exciting position because it allows me to sort of think about psychology's unique position in critical societal issues that are happening all around us, all around the world, and they don't seem to stop at this point.
Yeah.
So those are my two roles. I want to mention just really quickly sort of like what are the areas that I'm pushing forward this year and next year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, post-apology in the EDI office, we've been working on both both on dismantling structural racism and advancing racial equity. We understood that you couldn't take something away without putting something in, right? And so if we focus just on the eradication or the dismantling of racism, then what does that mean in terms of what we advance or what we support? And so the birth of that thought came the Racial Equity Action Plan. And the action plan, after, having conversations with so many stakeholders, racial equity experts, having multiple think tanks and focus groups and town halls, and really trying to get consensus about where psychology should be, we developed 4 quadrants, 4 domain areas that will be a focus for the association. Health and health equity, knowledge production and the scientific enterprise, APA and the workplace, so healthy workplaces that are inclusive of EDI, and educational equity, which include the training of psychologists. And then for the 23-24 year, we, through a series of getting feedback around, out of these 4 areas, what should be the priority focus, we are focused on health and health equity and knowledge production are the two top areas that we're focused on right now. So right now we're in the process of advancing psychology's contribution in those areas, how we advance racial equity in those two areas, looking at doing environmental scans in terms of who our partners can be, because there are other disciplines, take like public health, that have been, right? This work like so many decades before us, and we're kind of new to this landscape. So we don't want to come in and be like, psychology knows everything. No, but instead we want to say, hey, we would like to have major contributions to how can we partner with you, so that there's momentum, stronger momentum in figuring out what this looks like in society.
Yeah, I love that, because I've always said that if we truly want to practice anti-racist and, decolonize and dismantle, white supremacy within, that makes up the structure of psychology, we need to not silo that knowledge within this field and reach out to our siblings in other disciplines. And I've actually been intentional about working with especially public health folks in my own scholarship, because it's one thing to, theoretically, oh, this is what we found, these are the results of our study. But then how can you implement that in a policy, to make organizational and even societal changes?
That's right. That's right. And they have a different lens, right? They tend to look at, things like structural racism from, the epidemiologist and as as an epidemic, and that systemically looks very different than our focus. And so bridging, our understanding of human behavior and how humans react in ecosystems and their sort of like systemic way of viewing the areas that they cover, it really is an incredible partnership. And so, that's just one example of areas that we've been connecting with folks on and trying to learn from them, and them also trying, learning from us,
right?
Because there have been areas that they hadn't considered, in their process.
Thank you for sharing some of the initiatives and the service that you're doing. And how do you see the concept of cross-racial ethnic solidarity playing a role in achieving these goals within APA and, in the broader field?
Yeah, I really believe in diversity of thought, and that that when we're able to create spaces where we all bring our unique perspective and experiences, the outcome is only, incredibly multiplied and better than what we were to begin with. So having discussions with people who have different, worldviews and experiences is really the way to go. And the way that we've approached this is that every possibility that we have, whether we're having discussions about the racism work, or having discussions now that we're entering into a body of work in the EDI office around accessibility and disability inclusion, thinking about the diverse voices, right? And one of the things that our staff that lead that work often think about is like the intersectional lens, right? Mm-hmm. We are more than one thing, and we can bring more than one voice to the table. And so I think that the ethno differences and cultural differences of folks only are additional contributors to sort of thinking about this in a very dynamic and unique way. So I will continue to appreciate those voices. And I think the last thing that I'll say about that is that even when we think that there are cultures that feel very monolithic because that's the way that they're presented, you then understand the diversity that even lies within, and that happens when I talk to the colleagues in the other psych associations, right? Like, if we're talking to AAPA, it's like, there's a vast majority of different cultures that are embedded and mixed in. And so, different complications and issues, but also different gifts that come out of that. And so it's honoring all of that that I think really allows for the work to move forward in a very dynamic way. So I hope that answers the question. That I invite it, I support it. I want to continue to make sure that we build, the level of collaboration that's necessary because of it. And that foundationally, I don't see a way that we can move forward in this work without it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And also, I've seen you also speak before, and I love hearing you talk. And I you really do have that gift of really being able to listen, really being able to hear perspectives and things like that, right? But we know in leadership that it's not always the case, and there's always like skepticism and like resistance and things that occur with what we're talking about. So how do you kind of approach that in your leadership? Like, how do you really find that common ground and continue to do the solidarity work? Because in our experiences, what tends to happen is it just gets stuck there and nothing is really moved forward. And, then it just kind of, there's lots of internalization that happens. So I'm just asking in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, like I have to often be unafraid to enter into spaces that are really uncomfortable. So because we're doing a Division 45 podcast, I'll bring that up. As a graduate student, although I was an APA member and even throughout my early career, it was really interesting. I always found 45 very intimidating because I didn't know whether there was like a fit for me in the division, right? And even when I got into this position, I knew that perhaps, and I'm going to own and take responsibility that this was my own internalized way of seeing this because of my insecurities or my own issues with imposter syndrome. It's like, I thought, folks from 45 would be like, who does she think she is coming in here and saying that APA is going to do this and APA is going to do that? We've been doing this work for decades upon decades upon decades, right? And I had to reconcile that within myself, right? Like, here are the people that are like me. You're like me. I'm like you. We want the same thing. And I was so intimidated by figuring out where's my place in all of this, And so what I had to do is say, I'm going to go to the 45 conference. we're going to do this meeting together. I'm going to come and listen to the things that people did not like or what they felt about me or what they felt I wasn't doing or quickly enough or enough of. And I would then give feedback about like, okay, so then what does this mean for you supporting me? And I know that you may not like my way, but we're all in this together at the end, right? The goal, from what I'm hearing, is not different. Maybe our approach is different. Maybe the way we would have done it is different, but the goal doesn't seem different, which, as you said, Donna, it's ultimate liberation for our people, right? Liberation in psychology, decolonizing the way that we have, it's 130-year history, right?
Yeah.
And so I could not shy away from the conflict. I had to lean into it. And lean into it with love and compassion and understanding how trauma shows up for us.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding how racism shows up for us and how it shows up for me, and just being in community, even if you didn't want me there, until you said, I guess I'm not getting rid of you. So, okay, fine, come.
Well, it sounds like you're practicing cultural humility as well,
Yeah.
So that is definitely like to me a leadership that is effective and transformative, and the type of leadership that really starts with community building and not hierarchical.
Yeah. So like on that note, Dr. Donna and I also like talk about this a lot amongst ourselves, where in your experience,
how can leaders and organizations cultivate a culture of solidarity that goes beyond statements and policies that can lead to tangible and sustainable change?
Yeah. That's a really, really great question. And I think that part of it is that you have to identify, look, there could be a highway, of all the issues that we can cover. Imagine when I first came into either office, right? In the Office of Public Interest, one of the areas that we're sort of trying to redefine and advance is the idea of human rights. So beyond intersectionality, beyond sort of the siloed identities that we know have been historically marginalized, beyond the intersectional lens, what about just like every human deserves dignity and respect and deserves and should be entitled to the civil right to live in freedom, right? Mm-hmm. And so in advancing these sorts of things, one of my decision points and what I would offer to other leaders is that you can boil the ocean or try to, and there will be multiple competing demands that are going to come your way. And people are going to tell you what you should do because that is for them what motivates them, or it's their own personal professional agenda. Always, of course, like you said, Donna, with the listening ear and with cultural humility, I take all that information in. It does help to inform my decision making, but I choose not to boil the ocean. Mm-hmm. I choose to pick my lane in the highway and say, here's what we're going to focus on. And if you look at my track record, that's exactly what I did. One of the biggest conversations that I had with leadership was like, how can we tell other people how to do EDI if we haven't looked at ourselves yet and what we've done to hurt other people? And folks agree with that. Jennifer agreed with it. Author agreed with it. The board, the council of representatives. The apology was necessary and had to come first. But imagine if at the same time I was doing the apology, then I was also trying to start up this and start up that and create this and create that. My attention could not have been focused on achieving this for psychology. And for me, it was the foundational and stepping stone for everything else we were going to do. Because if we could not authentically apologize for the harms that we did, how could we do anything else? So what I say to leaders is, look, the time will come. You can sequentially position your change, in this world, because we are, by the nature of what we do, change agents, but you can't do it all at the same time. And you have to make hard choices, even when people are not happy with those choices, as long as you can stand by them. And that's the way that I choose to lead.
Yeah, you can't please everybody. That is definitely one thing in leadership, right?
Yeah. But you can take in enough information that
right.
In your heart, in your intuition, leaders need to listen to their intuition, mm-hmm. And when the timing is correct for these things to sort of, evolve. And that's another thing, for leaders to understand. Didn't I have the most perfect timing for all of this to happen? I mean, think about the sequence of presidents, right? Think about the change in leadership.
Yeah.
Think about what was right in front of us in society. It was just the time to do it. Mm-hmm. And so these are the kinds of elements that you cannot ignore. I believe in the power of energy in the universe. And it was like saying, like, this was divine intervention that it should happen right at this moment.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. And what you're really talking about also reminds me just of like change, like in treatment that we see when we work with families, right? Or couples, like with the time factor, and also how change in one system, one part of that larger system, can also have effects in these other layers that you're talking about. So I appreciate you sharing that perspective. And can we kind of like switch gears and kind of talk more about your books? More so, you can go in any order, but would really like our listeners to know what is urban trauma and a little bit more about your allyship identity model.
Sure. So yeah, I published Urban Trauma in 2018. Began, putting it together in late 2017. Compilation of sort of my life's work, really 15 years plus of work. And one of the things that I had started when I was here in New Haven, I was adjunct faculty or clinical associate clinical professor at Yale, and doing work with our fellowship program at the Child Study Center. I'm a clinical psychologist with a concentration in child and adolescent, and board certified in child and adolescent. So that had been really the majority of my clinical work and my scholarship work. And so I started a clinic that focused specifically on racial trauma before racial trauma was a thing. And then what was interesting is that the stories of the clients that were coming into the clinic seemed like a play and repeat, play and repeat, play and repeat. And what I started to understand was that there was this intersection between race and mental health that people weren't talking about, right? And that we disorder a lot of things because the way that our profession works is through, diagnosing and sometimes misdiagnosing or overdiagnosing. But the consideration of what does racism do to the body, and then what are the secondary, symptoms and behaviors that we will demonstrate, hadn't been a consideration. And so for me, urban trauma is a compilation of that work, right? And because I love history and I'm a history buff, and I'm a proponent that if we don't interrupt cycles, historical cycles of anything, fill in the blank, we will repeat them. I needed to outline in the first part of the book how we got here, right? And so there's the book is broken up into 3 sections. One that talks about the history of oppression, and I specifically focus in the African American community, and thinking about enslavement and the process of enslavement and how intergenerational trauma showed itself in the Black community. Then I looked at sort of the biological factors of how trauma is inherited and the intergenerational pieces of trauma. And then I looked at the environmental factors or the behavior manifestation of trauma as it relates to the intersection between race and mental health. So the combination of all of those things, I then coined as urban trauma. And that was the birth of the book. A Legacy of Racism is a subtitle. And then I wrote the book, and I was like, okay, this is good. I think this will help people learn about, all of these pieces, working in combination with one another. And after, in the midst of COVID and after George Floyd, when there was all of these initiatives, I will call them, to engage with communities of color, I was doing like one keynote after another, one presentation after another. And when I was in front of white audiences, a lot of what I was hearing is like, well, I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to do it, and I'm doing it wrong. And when I do it wrong, I just don't want to do it again. I thought, well, maybe I should help support to build a path to what allyship looks like. And that one is, that the major crux of it is that it's not a one and done, that there's actually a developmental process. And so the allyship identity model allows you to see yourself in this identity formation, and that it can be quite symbiotic because sometimes we advance and sometimes we take a couple steps back. But it gives you a roadmap, and that if you're intentional about your allyship, you can actually achieve it. And so that was my sort of contribution about, like, one, I remember doing a newspaper interview, and I was sort of, and the thing about the books here, and they asked me, what is your biggest, the biggest moment of enlightenment for you in doing this work throughout this time in history? And I said that, it is not the responsibility of people of color to dismantle structural racism.
Yep.
It is not our responsibility. There are people with power and privilege who have to own the responsibility to engage in the process of dismantling what was created by the folks that have benefited from it, right?
Yeah.
And so I felt that if I didn't speak on it, I would be absolving the responsibility of communities that needed the support, not because the oppressed needs to now be the ones that are the freedom fighters, but because there are people who need to open the way because of what they've benefited from centuries of structural and systemic racism.
You're here. Yes. I was just writing the notes because I'm putting together a books wish list.
Ah.
Yeah, as I heard you speak, I also was thinking that I obviously heard about your books after your team sent out the information, and then I also did my own research after seeing you at Division 45 conference, and that's kind of where I got to know more about your work. But I'm also going to send this to my university, because I feel like these are books that really need to be included in classes like intercultural awareness and development. And we have a supervision class, right? And I'm currently in that class. And when I heard you talk about the allyship identity model, you're talking about the developmental model, right? But using that with allyship. And I feel like graduate school programs need to start there also in their education, right? So I know that's one of your initiatives of training psychologists in the field and APA's role in that. And I'm really hoping that, when APA does visit these schools for accreditation, they do take time looking at the syllabus and seeing sometimes how outdated they are, right?
Yeah.
And how we really also need to include the work that so many scholars of color are doing and really learning from them.
Yes.
And also not just embed, EDI work as kind of like a footnote, but really into the DNA of, that program. Because that's what I feel like as a grad student, they would just have and take this class of multicultural class. And it's just the surface level type of work, but it doesn't really get to the crux of the issue, and it's not really helping in terms of then what can we do, what are the next steps, and what are we changing so that in our field, what are we really changing? So I really do hope that it's not going to be used as a blanket or lip service.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that what the book does is that it allows for a distinction between when you are engaging in EDI work that is performative versus when you're engaging in authentic EDI work that will actually move the needle, And I also believe that part of what I needed to do with the book is bring to conscious awareness that you cannot be a self-proclaimed ally, right? Allyship doesn't work that way. There's a vetting process that is supported by people of color, that through feedback and through engagement with the communities that you are also trying to help. And engagement, I'm going to underscore in bold, right? Because a lot of people say, I want to help this community, but then know nothing about the community, has never sat in, I'm like, have you ever had dinner with anybody from that community? Because, food is a really important part of how we communicate. So, just something as basic as that, right? And it's you can't self-proclaim, right? You have to be able to get the support and acknowledgement of the community that you're trying to serve to say that you're actually serving that community, and even then there should be some humility, but at least the foundational steps of that. And so the book allows you to see yourself and to monitor and to determine where you fall in all of this. And then it gives you a guide on where to go next, right?
Mm-hmm.
On where you are in the model. Yeah.
So as we're kind of reaching towards the end, and we also want to keep in mind your time, thank you so much for just, making time for us and having this conversation with us today. And for everything that you do and everything that you're going to do. And I just have one last question for you. And what advice do you have for the younger generation, or something you wish you had told yourself when you were first starting out?
I love this question, and I've been playing around with this question because I've been caring for little Maysa a lot more lately than I did in years past. And the other day, I actually did talk to her, and I said to her, not only is everything going to be all right, but you're going to be amazing. And every dream that you had, you're going to accomplish it. You're going to kill it. So keep going. Keep going. Know that sometimes there's going to be hurt that comes along the way. There's going to be obstacles that are going to set you back. That you're going to question yourself, and you're going to question your motives, and you're going to question your passion, and you're going to question your destination. But know that there's something greater for you. And that's what I would tell students. It is so hard right now to determine what that future is going to look like. And there are so many times where there are, where there are obstacles that come along the way that blind your capacity to see future. And it's okay to take a moment, to take a breath, and to nurture your little person inside of you and say, I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to nurture you, and I'm going to love you. And you are going to be the best version of you, and you're going to show up in this world, and you're going to change it. And that's what I told myself when I was little. I'm going to change the world. And here I am supporting the change of the face of psychology forever.
Love it.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that, because as you grow and as you have so many experiences as we age, right? And as you go through different domains in life, your inner child is always there, but it grows and changes with you too. So I love that. I love what you just said. And it also reminds me of, where I met you, where we were sitting next to each other at this discussion. And I think it was you and Dr. Cynthia, and you both spoke up, and it was a women's panel on leadership with students. And I loved how you spoke and how authentic you were. And from that day itself, I messaged Dr. Donna, and I was like, I met Dr. Maysa at Division 45, and I didn't get to talk to her then because everyone was talking to her, but I'm going to network with her at APA, and we're going to have you on because you really spoke up, and you were like, why are we still hearing this same narrative? And yeah, thank you for all your words of wisdom. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you both. This has been so delightful, and happy to come back anytime you need me to.
Oh my gosh. Don't say that. You will regret that.
Thank you for tuning in to our podcast today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. For more information about today's guests and their social media links, you can click on the description links of the episode. Pooja Mami Dana and Dr. Donna Demanarig host this podcast. Our podcast team includes our podcast interns, Alexis Rios from the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, and Petra Zadroga from Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. We also want to acknowledge our production team, David DeVito and Rachel Sheffer.
If you would like to know more about us or to watch video clips of this interview, then follow us on Instagram at APADiv45_Presidential Task Force, on TikTok and X at APADiv45_Coakley, or on YouTube and Facebook at Dr. Kevin Coakley's APA Division 45 Presidential Task Force.
Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity.